Pre-modern era, 1876 to 1900, the dawn of corruption. The pre-modern era began with the founding of the National League on February 2, 1876, establishing the first stable professional baseball league in America, though stable is a generous term considering the financial skullduggery that followed. 8 teams formed the original National League: the Boston Red Caps, Chicago White Stockings, Cincinnati Reds, Hartford Dark Blues, Louisville Grays, New York Mutuals, Philadelphia Athletics, and St. Louis Brown Stockings. The league immediately faced challenges with team stability, as the New York Mutuals and Philadelphia Athletics were literally kicked out after just one season for what the historical record politely calls financial irregularities. In reality, these teams were caught red-handed in a web of corruption that would make modern politicians blush. The Mutuals were discovered to have been fixing games and pocketing gate receipts, while team owners were literally stealing money from ticket sales and placing bets against their own players. The Philadelphia Athletics weren't much better. Their management was caught bribing umpires and selling game outcomes to gambling syndicates operating out of local saloons. During this era, baseball's fundamental rules underwent constant evolution as the sport sought its identity through trial and spectacular error. The pitcher's box was narrowed from its original width to 6 feet wide in 1866, then expanded to a 6-foot square in 1868, before being limited to 15 inches higher than the baselines in 1903, because apparently nobody could make up their damn minds about where pitchers should stand. The foul strike rule hadn't yet been established in the National League, meaning foul balls didn't count as strikes, allowing batters to swing wildly at terrible pitches without consequence, while pitchers slowly died of exhaustion. Bats were limited to 42 inches in length starting in 1868, and the modern ball size and weight were standardized in 1872, though players regularly tampered with equipment anyway. The era saw frequent franchise instability with teams folding, moving, or being unceremoniously booted regularly throughout the 1870s and 1880s. The American Association formed in 1882 as a rival major league, creating the first period of competing major leagues. This association differed from the stuffy National League by allowing Sunday games, selling alcohol at ballparks, and charging lower ticket prices. Naturally, the National League owners were absolutely livid that someone dared to make baseball affordable and fun. The Players' League formed in 1890 when players rebelled against salary caps in what amounted to baseball's first labor uprising, though it lasted only one season before wealthy owners crushed the rebellion like bugs. Equipment during this period remained primitive compared to modern standards, with players using small gloves that barely protected their hands and no protective gear for catchers beyond basic masks, leading to gruesome injuries that would send modern players crying to their agents. The pitching mound had no standardized height, and pitchers delivered the ball from various distances that changed multiple times throughout the era, creating a chaotic environment where nobody knew what the hell was going on. By 1900, the National League had consolidated into 8 stable teams known as the Classic 8: Boston Bean Eaters, Brooklyn Superbass, Chicago Orphans, Cincinnati Reds, New York Giants, Philadelphia Phillies, Pittsburgh Pirates, and St. Louis Cardinals. Little did anyone know that the next era would bring even more chaos, bizarre rules, and offensive strategies so pathetic they'd make a Little League team look like the Yankees. Dead Ball era, 1901 to 1920, when baseball was duller than watching paint dry. The dead ball era began in 1901 with the elevation of the American League from a minor league to major league status, creating 16 teams across 2 competing leagues locked in a bitter war for supremacy. This period earned its name from the dramatically low offensive production that made modern baseball look like a home run derby. Major league teams combined to hit just .254, .316, .332 in batting average, on-base percentage, and slugging percentage. The average game featured only 3.9 runs per team, 8.4 hits, and a pathetic .15 home runs that had fans literally falling asleep in the stands. The offensive nadir occurred in 1908 when the Major League batting average dropped to .239 and teams averaged just 3.4 runs per game, the lowest in baseball history, making this era the most boring period in sports history. Fans would bring pillows to games, and some ballparks started selling coffee by the gallon just to keep spectators conscious. The baseball itself contributed significantly to the low-scoring environment through both design and usage that bordered on the absolutely disgusting. Teams used the same ball throughout entire games, replacing it only if it began to unravel like a cheap sweater. Pitchers were permitted to deface or scuff the ball, Apply foreign substances like dirt or spit mixed with tobacco juice and cut into it with emery boards. The more creative and perverted pitchers would rub balls against their sweaty armpits, crotches, and some even urinated on their hands for better grip, creating what was essentially a biological weapons program disguised as baseball. Even foul balls and home runs were thrown back onto the field for continued use, meaning fans got to watch games played with increasingly filthy, diseased baseballs. As games progressed, balls became so dirty, worn, and literally covered in bodily fluids that they were difficult to see, while their reduced elasticity made hitting for distance nearly impossible. Rule changes during this era further favored pitchers over hitters in what amounted to a systematic torture of offensive players. The National League adopted the foul strike rule in 1901, counting foul balls as strikes, while the American League followed in 1903. Before this rule, batters could safely swing at marginal pitches without penalty, tiring out pitchers and creating more opportunities for fluky hits. The new rule forced batters to be more selective, dramatically reducing total hits across both leagues and turning baseball into a tactical chess match played by people who couldn't read. Strategic play during the dead ball era emphasized small ball tactics, now known as inside baseball. Teams relied heavily on stolen bases, hit-and-run plays, and bunting rather than power hitting, creating the most mind-numbingly boring brand of baseball ever witnessed by human eyes. The Baltimore chop, developed in the 1890s, became a signature low-power hitting technique to reach base that involved hitting balls into the ground so weakly that groundskeepers felt embarrassed. Between 1900 and 1920, league leaders in home runs had fewer than 10 home runs on 13 occasions, while league leaders in triples reached 20 or more on 20 different occasions. Owen Chief Wilson set the still-standing record of 36 triples in 1912, though calling him Chief was probably wildly inappropriate even by 1912 standards. The era ended abruptly with sweeping rule changes implemented for the 1920 season that would revolutionize the game forever. The Joint Rules Committee banned all freak pitches, including the spitball, shine ball, emery ball, and other disgusting doctored deliveries that had turned baseballs into petri dishes. However, 17 established pitchers who had built their careers on these revolting techniques were granted lifetime exemptions, with Burley Grimes being the last to retire in 1934, meaning fans had to endure 14 more years of watching grown men spit on baseballs. Additional changes required the removal of dirty and damaged balls from games, a policy partly inspired by the tragic death of Cleveland shortstop Ray Chapman in August 1920 from a Carl Mays fastball he couldn't see because the ball was covered in filth and bodily fluids. By 1921, offenses were scoring 40% more runs and hitting 4 times as many home runs as they had in 1918, finally ending the most tedious era in baseball history. But the next era would bring a larger-than-life character whose legendary appetite for everything would change baseball forever. Live ball era, 1921 to 1946. The Babe Ruth debauchery years. The live ball era began in 1921 following sweeping rule changes aimed at boosting offense and addressing earlier safety concerns, though the real story was about to be hijacked by one of the most legendary party animals in sports history. Umpires were now required to introduce clean, new balls whenever the current ball became scuffed or dirty, making the baseball easier to see, hit, and react to. Revolutionary concepts for the time. With the introduction of more frequent ball replacements, offense immediately surged. But the real story of this era was George Herman Babe Ruth, whose legendary appetite extended far beyond baseball and whose insane lifestyle made modern athletes look like choir boys. Ruth would routinely consume entire roasted chickens before games, wash them down with gallons of beer, and still manage to hit home runs while probably legally drunk. His famous quote about his salary summed up his philosophy: "I spend my money on wine, women, and song. The rest I waste." Ruth's sexual appetite was as legendary as his home run swing, with stories of him entertaining multiple women in hotel rooms while traveling with the Yankees. His teammates would find used condoms in the team bus, and Ruth once allegedly ate so many hot dogs that he was hospitalized with what newspapers politely called a stomachache, but was actually food poisoning from competitive eating. Ball specifications also evolved, including the cushion cork center and raised seams introduced in 1931, further boosting the ball's liveliness and home run rates. League structure continued mostly stable with the National and American leagues, but the power balance within teams shifted with the rise of stars like Ruth and Lou Gehrig, and with the New York Yankees emerging as a dominant force after their first World Series appearance in 1921. The sport's popularity exploded, helped by the spectacle of home runs, which became marquee events drawing fans to ballparks and radio broadcasts. Media coverage advanced significantly, with radio transforming baseball into a national sport. By the mid-1930s, fans followed games in real time over the airwaves, making stars household names and fueling baseball's spread nationwide. Scandals remained present. The 1919 Black Sox scandal, in which 8 Chicago White Sox players were banned for wagering on their own games in the World Series, selling out their own teammates and fans, led the owners to appoint Kennesaw Mountain Landis as the first commissioner of baseball in 1921. Landis was granted unprecedented power to guard the sport's integrity, though his authoritarian approach would make modern commissioners look like kindergarten teachers. Landis's authority would shape the league for the next 2 decades as baseball entered a new era of visibility and fan engagement. But nothing could prepare baseball for the social revolution that was about to shatter the sport's racist foundation. Integration era, 1947 to 1960, breaking barriers and breaking skulls. The integration era began on April 15, 1947, when Jackie Robinson stepped onto Ebbets Field as the Brooklyn Dodgers' first baseman, breaking the color barrier that had existed in Major League Baseball since the 1880s in what would become the most courageous act in sports history. Branch Rickey, the Dodgers' president and general manager, orchestrated Robinson's signing after recognizing both the moral imperative and financial opportunity of integration. Rickey had conducted extensive background research on Robinson, selecting him not only for his athletic ability, but for his character and mental strength to withstand the absolutely brutal racial hostility he would face. What the sanitized history books don't tell you is the horrifying reality Robinson endured daily. He received death threats so severe that the FBI opened an investigation, with letters containing explicit descriptions of how racist fans planned to murder him and his family. Hotels across the country refused service to Robinson, forcing him to sleep in segregated fleabag motels, while his white teammates stayed in luxury accommodations. Restaurant owners would literally slam doors in his face, and some ballparks had separate bathroom facilities marked with racial slurs. Even worse was the treatment from his own teammates, many of whom initially refused to play alongside Robinson. Several Dodgers players circulated a petition demanding Robinson's removal from the team, with one player allegedly telling reporters that he'd rather quit baseball than play with a Negro. Opposing players would deliberately spike him during slides, throw at his head with fastballs, and scream racial epithets. Within months of Robinson's debut, 3 more African-American players joined the majors. Larry Doby with the Cleveland Indians on July 5, 1947, becoming the first black player in the American League, followed by Hank Thompson and Willard Brown with the St. Louis Browns. By 1953, 35 former Negro League players had entered the major leagues, with 13 earning All-Star selections and 8 eventually reaching the Hall of Fame. Robinson, Doby, Roy Campanella, Ernie Banks, Willie Mays, Monty Irvin, Satchel Paige, and Minnie Minoso. The pace of integration varied dramatically across teams, with some franchises embracing change, while others stubbornly clung to racism for over a decade. The New York Yankees didn't integrate until 1955 with Elston Howard, the Philadelphia Phillies followed in 1957, and the Detroit Tigers integrated in 1958. The Boston Red Sox became the final team to integrate on July 21, 1959, when Pumpsie Green debuted as a pinch runner, completing the cycle 12 years and 107 days after Robinson's breakthrough, making them the last holdouts in what amounted to institutional racism. Integration fundamentally transformed the structure and quality of professional baseball while simultaneously destroying the Negro Leagues. Negro League attendance plummeted immediately after Robinson's debut, as fans flocked to see integrated Major League games instead. The Negro National League collapsed in 1948, and by 1953, only 4 teams remained in the reorganized Negro American League: the Birmingham Black Barons, Memphis Red Sox, Kansas City Monarchs, and Indianapolis Clowns. The era also witnessed significant franchise relocations as teams sought new markets and revenue streams. The Boston Braves moved to Milwaukee in 1953. The St. Louis Browns relocated to Baltimore as the Orioles in 1954, and the Philadelphia Athletics moved to Kansas City in 1955. These moves reflected changing demographics and the sport's expansion beyond its traditional northeastern strongholds, setting the stage for further expansion in the following decade. but expansion would bring its own revolutionary changes that would transform baseball from a regional sport into a national obsession. Expansion era, 1961 to 1976. Growing pains and technological madness. The expansion era began when Major League Baseball grew from 16 to 18 teams in 1961, ending over 50 years of league stability. The American League added the Los Angeles Angels and a new Washington Senators franchise to replace the original Senators, who moved to Minnesota and became the Twins. The National League followed in 1962 with the Houston Colt 45s and New York Mets. The Angels and Senators began play in 1961, while the Colt 45s and Mets started their inaugural seasons in 1962. The season length expanded alongside the league structure, growing from 154 to 162 games, because apparently 154 games wasn't enough torture for players and fans. The American League implemented the longer schedule in 1961, while the National League adopted it in 1962. This change became necessary to accommodate the increased number of teams and maintain scheduling balance. Major technological advances transformed the game during this era, most notably the opening of baseball's first domed stadium, the Houston Astrodome, on April 9, 1965. Mickey Mantle hit the first home run in a domed stadium during an exhibition game at the Astrodome, though the artificial environment would prove to be a controversial experiment in playing baseball indoors like a gigantic gymnasium. The era also saw the introduction of artificial turf, which was harder and faster than natural grass, placing new emphasis on speed both in the field and on the base paths. Players absolutely hated the artificial surface, complaining that it felt like playing on concrete covered with cheap carpet, leading to increased injuries and bizarre ball bounces that turned routine grounders into pinball machine scenarios. The league continued expanding in 1969 with 4 more franchises, bringing the total to 24 teams. The National League added the Montreal Expos, baseball's first Canadian team, and the San Diego Padres. The American League welcomed the Kansas City Royals and Seattle Pilots, though the Pilots lasted only 1 season before moving to Milwaukee and becoming the Brewers, making them baseball's biggest failures in franchise history. Rule changes during this period fundamentally altered the game's offensive balance in ways that would completely screw up everything fans thought they knew about baseball. The strike zone was expanded in 1963, contributing to a dramatic decline that hit an all-time low in 1968 when the Major League batting average fell to .238. Responding to concerns that pitching dominance was hurting fan interest, Major League Baseball lowered the pitcher's mound from 15 inches to 10 inches and narrowed the strike zone in 1969. The American League introduced the controversial designated hitter rule in 1973, allowing teams to use a specialized hitter in place of the pitcher. This change created a bitter philosophical divide between leagues, with National League purists arguing that the DH destroyed baseball's strategic elements, while American League fans embraced the additional offense. Despite these changes, pitching continued to dominate through much of the 1970s. The era also witnessed significant franchise movement as teams followed population shifts to new markets. The Athletics moved from Kansas City to Oakland in 1968, playing their first West Coast game on April 17, 1968. The new Washington Senators franchise relocated to Arlington, Texas in 1972, becoming the Texas Rangers after just 11 seasons, proving that Washington couldn't keep a baseball team to save its political life. But the next era would bring changes so revolutionary and controversial that they would fundamentally alter the relationship between players and owners forever. Free agency era, 1977 to 1993, the money revolution and labor wars. The free agency era began with the complete transformation of baseball's employment structure following the 1976 season, fundamentally altering how teams assembled rosters and how players approached their careers in what amounted to the greatest labor revolution in sports history. The era's foundation was laid in 1966 when the Major League Baseball Players Association hired Marvin Miller as executive director, who orchestrated a decade-long legal battle that culminated in the Messersmith-McNally arbitration decision of 1975. This ruling declared that players who completed their contracts without signing new ones became free agents, dismantling the reserve clause that had bound players to teams indefinitely since baseball's early days, essentially ending player slavery. The first free agent class in 1976 featured 24 players, headlined by Reggie Jackson, who signed a groundbreaking 5-year, $3 million contract with the New York Yankees. money that seemed absolutely insane at the time. Player salaries exploded immediately, with the average major league salary increasing sixfold between 1966 and 1979. This dramatic shift in player compensation created a new dynamic where successful franchises could sign the best available talent, leading to increased competitive imbalance as wealthy teams like the Yankees, Dodgers, and Athletics dominated the free agent market like spoiled rich kids in a candy store. The era witnessed significant technological and media developments that expanded baseball's reach and revenue streams. Cable television emerged as a major force, with superstation broadcasts allowing teams like the Atlanta Braves and Chicago Cubs to develop national followings. ESPN began broadcasting in 1979, providing dedicated sports coverage that elevated baseball's profile year-round, rather than just during the season. Night games became increasingly common as teams sought to maximize television revenues, with the Chicago Cubs finally installing lights at Wrigley Field in 1988 after decades of day-only baseball, because tradition meant nothing when money was involved. League expansion continued during this period with the addition of two franchises in 1977, the Seattle Mariners and Toronto Blue Jays, bringing the total to 26 teams. The Blue Jays became the second Canadian franchise and eventually won back-to-back World Series championships in 1992 and 1993. The Colorado Rockies and Florida Marlins joined in 1993, establishing the 28-team structure that would persist until the late 1990s. The era also featured several significant scandals and controversies that shaped baseball's governance. The Pete Rose gambling investigation culminated in his lifetime ban in 1989, revealing that baseball's hit king had been betting on games while managing the Cincinnati Reds. Drug scandals like the Pittsburgh drug trials in 1985 involving players like Dave Parker and other non-Pirates like Keith Hernandez brought unwanted attention to substance abuse issues, with cocaine use becoming rampant among players who had suddenly acquired massive amounts of disposable income. Labor disputes reached a crescendo with work stoppages in 1981 and 1985, foreshadowing the devastating strike that would define the following era. The bitter warfare between players and owners created an atmosphere of mutual hostility that would poison labor relations for decades. The period ended with the introduction of wild-card playoff spots in 1993, expanding postseason opportunities and setting the stage for the offensive explosion that would follow. But nothing could prepare baseball for the chemical enhancement scandal that would define the next era, steroid era. 1994 to 2005, the chemical enhancement circus. The steroid era began with Major League Baseball's return from the devastating 1994 strike, coinciding with the widespread use of performance-enhancing drugs that defined this period in what became the most chemically enhanced circus in sports history. The era emerged from the perfect storm of increased offensive output following the 1994 to 1995 strike, lax drug testing policies, and public fascination with home run records. While steroids had been officially banned in MLB since Commissioner Fay Vincent's 1991 memo, the league implemented no testing program until 2003. Creating an environment where PED use was virtually undetectable, essentially giving players a green light to pump themselves full of chemicals. The period reached its cultural zenith during the 1998 home run chase between Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa, who both surpassed Roger Maris's long-standing record of 61 home runs. McGwire finished with 70 home runs, while Sosa hit 66, captivating the nation and helping baseball recover from the fan alienation caused by the 1994 strike. During this chase, McGwire publicly admitted to using androstenedione, a substance legal in baseball but banned by the NFL and NCAA, though fans were too mesmerized by home runs to care about the chemical assistance. What fans didn't realize was the grotesque physical transformation happening before their eyes. McGwire's body had swollen to cartoonish proportions, his back was covered in acne from steroid use, and his head had literally grown multiple hat sizes. Sosa's skin had become so tight from muscle growth that he looked like a bodybuilder wearing a baseball uniform. Barry Bonds shattered McGwire's record just 3 years later, hitting 73 home runs in 2001 despite never reaching 50 homers in any previous season. This offensive explosion extended beyond individual achievements, as membership in the exclusive 500 home run club increased dramatically. Between 1998 and 2009, 10 players reached 500 career home runs, compared to just one player joining the club between 1987 and 1998. 6 of these 10 players were later linked to PED use. Barry Bonds, Alex Rodriguez, Mark McGwire, Manny Ramirez, Rafael Palmeiro, and Gary Sheffield. The physical transformation of these players was disturbing to witness. Bonds' head grew so large that his batting helmet no longer fit properly, his body became a mass of unnatural muscle, and his temperament became increasingly aggressive, classic signs of roid rage. Players were developing bizarre injuries from muscles growing faster than tendons could adapt, leading to catastrophic breakdowns. The era began unraveling with the September 3, 2003 federal raid on the Bay Area Laboratory Cooperative, BALCO, in Burlingame, California. Investigators seized financial and medical records allegedly including Barry Bonds' drug regimen calendar and payment records, revealing a sophisticated doping operation that made Olympic scandals look amateurish. That same year, MLB implemented its first steroid testing program when anonymous surveys revealed that over 5% of players tested positive. Major League Baseball gradually strengthened its drug policies throughout the mid-2000s in response to mounting public pressure and congressional intervention. The initial 2004 policy called for treatment rather than punishment for first-time offenders, but after Senate committee criticism, the league adopted harsher penalties in January 2005. The new policy imposed 10-game suspensions for first offenses, with escalating penalties for repeat violations. By November 2005, penalties increased again to 50 games for the first offense, 100 games for the second, and lifetime bans for the third. Alex Sanchez of Tampa Bay became the first player suspended under the new testing program, receiving a 10-game suspension in 2005. But the chemical circus was about to end, ushering in a new era of technological revolution and analytical warfare. Modern era, 2006 to the present, the nerd revolution versus old-school warfare. The modern era emerged from Major League Baseball's efforts to clean up the sport following the steroid era and has been characterized by enhanced drug testing, evolving offensive strategies, and rapid technological integration that sparked the greatest philosophical war in baseball history. This period began with the implementation of stricter performance-enhancing drug policies and independent testing through the World Anti-Doping Agency, fundamentally changing how players approach their careers and training regimens. The era initially witnessed a dramatic power decline as home run totals fell significantly from their inflated peaks of the late 1990s and early 2000s. However, by the mid-2000s, offense surged again due to changes in player approach rather than chemical enhancement. Hitters increasingly adopted launch angle optimization and pull-heavy strategies, leading to record-breaking home run totals in 2017 and 2019. This shift coincided with advanced analytics becoming mainstream, as teams employed sabermetrics to revolutionize player evaluation, positioning, and strategic decision-making. What emerged was an epic battle between traditional baseball scouts, who relied on baseball instincts, and computer nerds who had never played the sport but could calculate WAR statistics in their sleep. Old-school baseball men complained that the game was being ruined by geeks with calculators who didn't understand the human element of baseball. Meanwhile, analytics enthusiasts argued that traditional scouts were dinosaurs, clinging to outdated methods based on superstition rather than facts. Major rule changes have defined recent seasons, particularly the comprehensive package implemented in 2023 and continued modifications through 2025. The pitch clock, introduced in 2023, requires pitchers to begin their delivery within 15 seconds with bases empty and 20 seconds with runners on base, dramatically reducing game times. This change created a generational divide among fans, with older viewers complaining that baseball was being destroyed by TikTok attention spans, while younger fans argued the previous pace was as boring as watching paint dry. Defensive shifting restrictions mandate that teams position at least 2 infielders on each side of second base, with all infielders required to have both feet within the infield dirt when the pitch is released. Larger bases, increased from 15 inches square to 18 inches square, encourage stolen base attempts and reduce injury risk. Traditional baseball purists viewed these changes as alterations to the game's strategic elements, while progressive fans embraced the increased action. The current season features additional refinements to these policies. Teams violating the shift restrictions now face automatic walks for batters rather than simply receiving ball calls, while replay reviews can now determine if runners overrun bases during abandonment situations. Spring training experimented with the automated ball strike system across 13 stadiums, allowing teams 2 challenges per game for ball strike calls, which was also implemented during the 2025 All-Star Game. Technological integration has accelerated throughout the modern era, with StatCast data collection beginning in 2015 and now providing real-time metrics on exit velocity, launch angle, and defensive positioning. These advancements have fundamentally changed how teams construct rosters, with specialized relievers becoming increasingly valuable and starting pitcher usage declining. The era has also seen continued franchise movement, most recently with the Athletics relocating from Oakland to West Sacramento for the 2025 season while planning their eventual move to Las Vegas, proving that even in the modern era, team loyalty means nothing when money is involved. The ongoing tension between tradition and innovation continues to divide the baseball world, with some fans embracing the analytical revolution, while others yearn for the pure baseball of previous eras. If you want to hear about more baseball and sports drama, subscribe to follow along.